Of course, you get a chance to add to your analysis now. So I'll pass the floor to Dr. Farish.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Malaysia Brights, the Islamic Residence Forum for organizing this, and of course to all of you for being here. I am in a rather difficult position because I consider Professor Khoo my teacher. So if I stand up, it's putting me at the same level with him, but I can't sit down either. So I'll compromise halfway. I'd like to just take off from what Professor Khoo was talking about, and maybe start with an anecdote. Because Professor Khoo talked about the Eurasia history. Not too long ago, in fact I think last year, a very important exhibition was held in Singapore at the Asian Civilizations Museum. It was an exhibition on the material culture and material arts of China during the middle part of the Qing dynasty, during the period of Kangxi. Now it's interesting to note that this was probably one of the best collections of art from that particular period of Chinese history ever amassed. And yet, when we look at the evidence of this material history, the fine quality of writing, manuscripts, painting, porcelain that was produced then, there seems to be a very curious and very obvious disconnect between that past of China and the present of China today. Simply because those with any knowledge of the developments of China, in the post-World War II era, will know that a significant change took place with the Cultural Revolution. And it was during the Cultural Revolution when all these elements of Chinese culture and history were regarded as bourgeois, elitist, over-intellectual, not reflecting the real socio-economic conditions of the industrial working class, or the proletariat. And summarily, much of this material was destroyed, burned, banned, or just lost. And it's interesting to see that the China that once could produce this refined culture, that was not only aesthetically appealing, but which touched upon some of the issues that Professor Khoo mentioned earlier. The need for integrity in the public domain. There was the emergence of perhaps the first generation of non-elite intellectuals in China, the expansion of the public domain, the role of writing, literature, critical inquiry. All of that seems to have been lost entirely, and when we look at the China of today, the rising China of today, what we see are, and maybe here we should not be entirely believing of the things we see on television, but the impression we get is that of a China that is rapidly developing, but at the same time rapidly consuming on a scale as never before. But where is that? Where is this China of the past? That the concern for integrity, rule of law, accountability, a certain level of moral conduct among not only its citizens but also its leaders. All of that seems to have been lost and given way to the rule of the market. And I think this is symptomatic of what we see in Asia as a whole today. Professor Khoo talked about the loss of history in Malaysia, and you describe it as a systematic erasure almost, a systematic institutional process where the teaching of history has been not only downgraded in terms of its value and purpose, but also in many instances we've witnessed deliberate perhaps omissions, erasures in our history books, and now of course we are on the brink of losing history altogether, in the same way that we've lost philosophy as another crucial discipline in the humanities in this country. Now, these changes don't have to necessarily happen through revolutions, the Cultural Revolution being one exception, but in cases like Malaysia and many other parts of Southeast Asia, we are witnessing the death of the humanities not through revolutions, but through another sort of revolution, that is the market revolution, and where universities are now described as an industry. I remember during my brief period of teaching in Malaysia, when we were told that students were no longer students, they were knowledge consumers, We are no longer teachers, we are knowledge providers. I didn't realize I was a service provider like an ATM machine. And that's what's happening. So when we link that to the topic of today's discussion, which is the present state and the future of Malaysia's political development, starting off from some of the concerns raised by Professor Khoo, and I share these concerns, I think we need to place Malaysia in its proper context: geographical, economic, political, geostrategic, and also historical. I'll talk less on history because Professor Khoo has talked about this in greater detail prior to me. But let's just place Malaysia in the context of the world map today, and perhaps be appreciative of the competing political and economic pressures that are now prevailing not only upon Malaysia but upon all the other countries in the region. And this might explain how and why our society is changing in ways that we have not been able to anticipate. Professor Khoo comes from a generation that lived through World War II and lived through the emergency, lived through not only the riots of '69 but crucially the riots of '48, which a lot of people forget. I was only born in '67, so I'm not that old. I'm not quite dinosaur, I'm baby dinosaur. I'm on my way there. I just hatched, but I'm certainly older than most of you here. My school blazer is probably older than most of you here, by the way. So we, I suppose, have this three-generational continuum in this room today. And when we look at how Malaysia has changed, let me just state two provisional premises. First, I think it is safe to say that the very first generation of first Malayans, as they were called then, Malaya in '57, the very first generation of Malayans could not have anticipated all the developments that we see today. No one could envisage how Malaysia has developed to become what it is today. In fact, when we look at the material evidence that we have, certainly in the early reports, it's always been noted, for example, in '57, as soon as Malaya was independent, most of the colonial functionaries immediately changed their currency to pounds and went back because the assumption was that Malaya would burn down within 1 year. The immediate assumption was that Malaya would immediately slip into racial chaos, repeating the ethnic religious conflicts that we saw in the splitting up between India and Pakistan, which interestingly enough did not happen. Nor did people anticipate the rapid development that we have witnessed here. I still recall a time when, as a kid growing up in Ampang, Gombak was literally in the jungle. There was nothing here. When we wanted to go to picnics, we would come to Gombak. Gombak for us was like Taman Negara. Now your university is in Gombak, We used to come here for picnics because there were just streams and rivers. Remember that, Prof? You bring your picnic basket because there was nothing here. I have a book in my collection, because I have a large collection of books on Malaysia called Bang Bang in Ampang. And it's written by an American tin miner whose tin mine was actually just behind Ampang Point now. And this book was written during the emergency, 1948 to 1949. And if you look at the photos, Jalan Ampang has always been among the longest. I think it is the longest road of Kuala Lumpur. And beyond what is now KLCC, there was a fence saying you are now entering area controlled by the communist bandits, as they were called then. So basically, anywhere beyond KLCC, you're on your own. And this planter was writing about his experience being a tin miner.